Hey guys, I'm really excited about today's podcast episode. I've got Andrew Ackerman from New York City, and he is an entrepreneur at heart. He's a startup founder times two. He's also a VC, and he's recently written a book, which he's going to talk to us all about entrepreneurial Odyssey and how to achieve startup success. We're going to talk all the way from startup idea to getting funding, and I'm really happy to have guests such as Andrew on the show. So, Andrew, welcome.
Thanks for having me. And I was wondering how I was going to subtly get the book into the conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating discussion. Start off by introducing yourself. I know you've done quite a number of successes, and we'll dive into the book.
Yeah, sure. So the short version is I've done two startups. One was a reasonably good success. And the other, if you ever heard the phrase experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted, it was a hell of an experience. I've also worked at a family office, which is code word for investing money for a rich old person. That was interesting. And somehow I got connected with a company called Dream Adventures, which was one of the earliest accelerators and VC funds, which got me to start doing my angel investing at a quantum level higher. It kicked me up a notch. So since then, I've invested in 70 startups, almost all different industries. I focused in a couple different industries more recently. And at the tail end of all that, I'm talking to hundreds of different startups. I'm mentoring them. Why don't I just write it down? It's not that simple, but that's the short version.
Yeah, fascinating. And I really, because I love a friend of mine from college, he took his company public, Coinbase, and it's really been fascinating to see his success. And I love talking to VCs. Dive in, just talk about I know your ideas, what are some of the most common pitfalls and traps that from going from idea all the way to getting funding is no joke. So what do you commonly see that cause startups to fail?
Sure. So let's be a little bit clear. Right? There's kind of two kinds of startups here. There's the tech startups like the Coinbases or going back to the Amazons of the world, the OpenAI, and thousands of other ones that no one's ever heard of. And then there's the traditional small business startup. So that's, hey, our village has grown, our small town has grown. We can support our own dry cleaner. Why are we driving 20 minutes to the other village? Let's put one here. So those are in some ways very different, in some ways similar. One of the main differences is if you're doing a tech startup, you really need to have a good answer to why now. So what I mean by that is there's so many people like banging against ideas, trying to find like a really good opportunity that if it's something that could have been done 3, 4, 5 years ago, hundreds of people are already trying it. And then they may be like dozens that are far ahead of you, or it may just be a bad idea and they've all failed. But if there's not a strong why now there, then you're probably barking up the wrong tree, either late to the party or it's a bad party. A little different with a traditional small business. Hey, there's no real reason I need to start a dry cleaner now, but I'm really good at it and let's do it.
Yeah, interesting. One of these types of questions is you talk about why, for example, like I was talking to Brian and he was talking about Coinbase, and Coinbase went public in 2020, but his cohort with the Y Combinator, he was with the Stripe, and Stripe is still private. So why should people get funding? Is VC funding necessary? A lot of companies are choosing to stay private. Talk about that.
That's actually awesome. So the private companies have all gotten VC funding. They're choosing not to get public funding, which is a totally different question. And we can talk about that later, but it's less interesting in my book. Here's the thing that kind of surprises a lot of people when I say it. VC funding is the least worst alternative for a certain type of startup. It really is. So when you think about it, you're giving away part of your company. If you could find a way to grow your company without giving away part of your company, wouldn't that be better? So let's go back to the different types of startups. If I'm starting up a dry cleaner, I can probably get a loan from the bank because the bank knows how dry cleaners work. And I have equipment that can secure it and I have property. So I don't have to give away part of my company. I can fund it that way. Or if I'm starting a consultancy, I don't need a lot of money to start with. I'm just going to grow it out of revenue. So those are awesome in their ways. Now, the difference is you're never going to make $1 billion company out of a dry cleaner. You can get a lot of dry cleaners, but that's a different path. Now, the tech startups, Instagram, for instance, or Coinbase, right? That required a lot of money up front to do it. And it was something that banks had no idea how it worked. It didn't exist before. It's not just, oh, show me the top line. Everything else makes sense. It's, I don't understand any lines in your income statement. I don't believe any of them. I don't know if any of them are true. Nobody does because you've never done it before, right? So you can't get a bank loan. You can't grow it out of revenue because you're not going to have revenue for a year or two, at least, maybe a lot longer. How do you get money to do that? That leaves VCs, angels and VCs. We're your last alternative for that kind of startup. So, that's when I tell people like that, they're like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about it. Some people fetishize it. They glamorize getting VC money. No, you've just bought oxygen and you paid a lot for it. The only thing is there's no one else that was willing to sell it to you.
Yeah. Interesting. So going to the book, who are you catering to? Why did you write it? There's so many business books out there. What differentiates the Entrepreneur Odyssey versus other startup books?
That's a great question. Thank you. I couldn't have asked for any better ones. Number one, it's anyone who is founding a startup or thinking about founding a startup. It's even good for angels who are thinking about investing in startups. It's the perfect gift to give your mom so they get off your case about like, why don't you get a real job? No, everybody. Sorry, totally self-serving answer, but true. The part that I really liked about your question is I actually hate business books. Most business books are, pardon me for saying so, really effing boring, right? It's the same dude in the Midwest ghostwriting it. And it's like anecdote, name drop, 1 page, half page summary at the end. And really, if you just ripped out those half page summaries at the end of each chapter and stapled them together, you'd have a really good 20-page PowerPoint. But instead, it's 250 pages of filler. And those are the good ones even. There's some good ones like that where I can only read them 10 pages at a time because they're so mind-numbingly boring. Okay, there are a lot of people that hate me when I say that. But anyway, putting that aside, so I've written a bunch of art. I've written like 70 plus articles. And I actually do that because I find that A, I enjoy it, and B, it's a good way to get startups who I might want to invest in to come to me. It's lazy. It's easier than me going out to find them. If I can write and they come to me, that's great. So I'm like, okay, why don't I write this up? But I didn't want the book to be like every other boring, bland startup book. So what I did is I wrote it like a novel. So I had learned along the way, I've mentored hundreds of startups, that they took my advice, or they understood my advice and got excited about it better when I was able to tell them about another startup that was like theirs in a similar situation what they did. That clicked, that was more memorable, that was more impactful. So I'm like, oh, I'll just write this as a story about a fictional startup like Silicon Valley, only for reals. By the way, everything that happened to that startup in the first 5 years of the show, like has actually happened to startups I know. Not all to the same one, but that is like spot on. Forget about Shark Tank. Silicon Valley is your best to look at Silicon Valley. So I have a fictional startup that I take through in the book from like this first pitch and like this kind of crappy law firm evening pitch event as a solo founder. They meet a mentor, and then the mentor kind of takes him under his wing and helps him go all the way through until he raises his first round of financing. So it's all the advice embedded within what I hope is a more interesting and certainly more memorable format.
Interesting. And which brings me to a lot of entrepreneurs and founders listening to this. What are some of the hot areas, because you've invested in 70 startups, what are the hot areas that people are looking towards in the future?
Okay, so I'm going to just be a little contrarian. I don't care what's hot. Right. What's hot for me is an opportunity that you're approaching, that you're uniquely suited to solving, and that not a zillion other people are ahead of you in. So the curses and the benefits of going into stuff that's now applied AI is that everyone can do it, right? So you're one of a zillion people doing it. And the same thing happened when blockchain came out, when machine vision and speech to text. Like as soon as these things become possible, which is the why now, a whole bunch of people are like, oh, I can solve that problem now. So you got like 30 people coming in. And then I'm looking at 30 identical decks. They just have different logos on them. Everyone thinks everyone else has stolen their idea. I know. So I'm trying to find the ones who I think are going to be like, this is the team that's going to execute on it. I want to bet on this jockey. Because the horse in those cases are all the same. So I would say, don't worry about what's hot, right? Within broad parameters. Find something where there is a legit why now. You're solving a massive pain point that is intense, widespread, and frequent. Those are my 3 dimensions of pain. And there's a why now. That's why no one else has solved them before. And I don't care if it's like totally unglamorous. For instance, a startup I'm looking at right now that I'm helping that global as well, I'll invest in, is making a robot that cleans trash chutes.
Interesting.
My kids think that's the least sexy thing ever. It is the least sexy thing ever. It's a trash chute. The robots are the why now. It's hard to do. They have the engineering chops to do it. Shockingly, they're an Israeli startup, which is it's almost shocking when they aren't. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Not AI, no AI involved.
It's fascinating because the way you described it is there's all these startups and they're trying to solve the same problem. So it depends on the founders and the team and how well they execute. And also, which the next question I have for you is because you've looked at this VC landscape, and I was listening to a podcast the other day talking about the A16Z podcast where they're talking about how VC has changed. And you say that VCs are hypocrites. What's the difference between today's startup founder and the startup founder 20 years ago?
Sure. Thanks for doing your homework. I can explain why I say we're hypocrites. But let me ask you your actual question first. The thing that's changed the most is it's one of these two-sided coins. The more tech has evolved, the easier it has been to create a startup and get further along without asking for a lot of money. The flip side is the more the VCs demand to see before we give you money. So I'll give you like an example. When I did my first startup in 2000, it was already a little easier. Like it used to be that anything you had to do, you had to buy your own blade server, stick it under your own desk. I'm kidding, but in your own refrigerated like server room, and you had to configure it yourself. You had to like code everything, right? There was no libraries of code out there. So to simply get out of bed, you needed $5 million.
Wow.
Now already when I did my first startup in 2000, we didn't have to store the server ourselves. They were like server, like Globix, for instance, they were up even when the planes hit the World Trade Center and like everything on my end was down, or during the big blackout, our site was up. I mean, I didn't know because other things were going on, but at least they were hosting them. And then AWS comes along, which I don't need to own my own servers. I can just rent time in servers. And then GitHub comes along. I don't have to write my own code. There's some code out there I can repurpose. And all the APIs to other services, great, I'll just connect with other people's stuff. All of that took what used to cost $5 million to make a startup to get to the same point of like traction, down to 500,000, down to 50,000, to the point now where you could do it in nights and weekends for almost no money.
Wow.
The difference is you used to be able to come in and ask a VC, here's my business plan. I need $5 million to get started. Now, if somebody comes to that, I'm like, that's very cute. Like everyone else has gotten to revenue with no money. Now, there are exceptions, obviously. Like I need $50 million to build a huge LLM to do whatever. That's maybe still true. But for the vast majority of things right now, especially if it's applied AI or things like that, you can get very far with very little money.
Yeah.
Now we're going to expect you to get there before we give you our money.
Wow. Yeah. It's amazing. The other question, because a lot of the criticism around VC and startup investing is that it's only reserved for the ultra wealthy, the accredited investors, and like Robinhood, Vlad, they're trying to, and Coinbase as well, they're trying to tokenize access to private needs. What are your thoughts on tokenization of startups to raise funding?
So the vast majority of the time I see tokenization, it's a solution looking for a problem, right? It's not necessary. So first of all, like there's a lot of reasons to be critical of the VC community. That's not one of them, right? So there's a lot of it is sour grapes. It's very hard to raise money. I've done it. Like there's no fun in fundraising. By the way, it's even harder to raise money for a fund than it is to be a startup founder. But no founder listening to this is going to believe me on that one. Believe me, it's a lot harder. So we feel your pain. We really do. Most of us have been there. We've been on both sides of the table. But a lot of the criticism like, oh, you don't get it. Respectfully, we get it. It's your startup wasn't there yet. But with regard to tokenization or just democratizing VC investing, it is like gambling. It really is. So to the extent that we want to have regulations that say that the average Joe shouldn't be gambling their life savings on things that are super risky, that's a bigger question of policy. Now, when everyone tries to democratize it, what they really mean is they're creating a fund and then anyone can get into the fund. You can do that now. There's the regs let you do it. There's no reason it has to be a token though. Like a token is good when you want a decentralized ledger, right? So when the problem is, I don't trust any central group to keep track of these things. I want to be able to just with you, nobody's business but my own. That doesn't solve a problem here. Who cares?
Yeah, interesting. The other question, because a lot of the audience, they have kids, and obviously the nature, especially after COVID, the nature of education has changed, a lot of remote and online, and now we've got kids learning in the metaverse. And you talked about the path to starting a company is almost zero now. So where do you see the future of startups? Is it just going to be everybody's going to become an entrepreneur? Obviously, AI is taking a lot of jobs away. And so talk about where you see the future of jobs in startup
Sure.
founders.
So you wrap three questions in one. So let me see if I can go through them in order. Not everyone will be an entrepreneur because not everyone has that level of comfort with risk at that point in their life. Part of the reason I wrote this, one of the other reasons I wrote this as a novel, is because I wanted people who are maybe sitting in their cubicle or in their office thinking like, this is such a painful problem. I'm sure it's not just me. There's got to be a better way. Oh, I think I have a better way. Do I quit my job and do a startup? So I want them to understand on a gut level what it's really, not the glamorized Steve Jobs biopics, not the how-to guys which give them none of that flavor. I want them to know what it's like to watch your bank account go down every month because there's no money. You're paying yourself, right? I want them to know what it's like to go out there and what you actually do day by day, what it feels. And I don't think most people have that. And I don't think it's a bad thing. And the people who do maybe have that, I want them to have the skills that they can be good at it. I happen to, as an aside, believe that people who are not temperamentally suited to be an entrepreneur should learn those skills anyway for their regular job. That's a different conversation. And they're not going to leave and do a startup. That was question number one. Question number two, AI stealing jobs. Like, we've been here before. We go all the way back to the Luddites in pre-industrial England. There's always been something stealing jobs. And usually what that means is it's really rough for a little bit. And by the way, a little bit and really rough, like I'm not sympathetic here. But then the resources that are freed up and upskilled with this new technology are much more productive at what they do next. So I do believe AI is going to be a force multiplier. It's not going to, will replace some jobs, but it will enhance other jobs and just make it possible to do a lot of things that we wouldn't do otherwise. So I don't think it's as simple as, oh, it's going to take my job, with the exception of what's next year's travel agent, right? Because that kind of got screwed. So you get the idea there. And the last thing, the future of jobs, it's wrapped in with that. But this is a movie we've seen before. Throughout your career, if you expect it to be, hey, this is how I started my job, I'm going to do my work the same way for the next 40 years of my life, you're in for some rude surprises. You need to be willing to constantly learn, constantly adapt. The way you do your job in 5 years, I was going to say 10, but in 5 years, will be radically different than the way you do it now. If you're comfortable with that, if you develop the attitude where you're excited about that rather than scared, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. To top it off, when you were writing the book, did you apply the same rigor to writing your book that you insist on from the startups that you invest in?
Hell no, I'm a hypocrite too. Yeah, okay, I'll roll that back a little bit. If I were super rigorous about it, I have been treating it like a startup. So in the ways that I have been treating it like a startup, it was important to me that I get a traditional publisher because that was a proof point for me. It was a traction point for me. Could I sell it? Okay, so I did. It's important to me that it make money on its own. So I'm not using this as like a glorified calling card where I'm putting a bunch of money out there to market it. I don't care how much I lose, but now I'm a best-selling author. You should hire me as a consultant. By the way, for corporates, you should hire me as a consultant. I'm pretty awesome when it comes to different investment platforms and corporate venture in general, but I digress. But I'm not doing this as a glorified calling card. I wanted it to succeed or fail as a business venture of its own. And I don't know yet. It's too soon, so don't ask me that question. Yeah. Where I didn't treat it with the same rigor is I didn't do the same kind of, okay, problem solution. Yeah, I did, because all the other books are boring, or you're looking at blogs that are scattered and you're assembling your own how-to guide. I didn't do the competition slide maybe as rigorously as I could. I didn't go out there and find all the books out there that did it and like line them up and say, this sucks for this reason and that one sucks for the other reason. I did a little bit of research and just kind of, yeah, if it's not that easy for me to find, it's not out there, or it's not that easy for them to find. So I didn't do the full equivalent of a pitch deck for the book, but I did do a lot of it, and some of it was a little bit haphazard. But I also did exactly what I tell my startups not to do. I was very undisciplined about writing it. You want to hear? I'll tell you a funny story. The startup in the book, Call Jar, is based on another startup that I'm doing on the side for reals. It's a speech recording, speech to text startup that is a privacy compliant way of recording your half of a phone conversation. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's use that in the book. It's a good example because it could be B2B, B2C, B2B2C. So it had a lot of applicability. Everything I wrote in the book was basically everything I taught my startups when I was running an accelerator program, roughly in the same order. I just needed to change it all from me lecturing or me talking about a pitch deck to an actual story and embedding it in real life anecdotes. So I spent 20 minutes bullet pointing it. And then for the next 2 or 3 months, I walked around with my phone and I was that weird guy muttering into his phone in the subway car, which text right into Google Docs. So I wrote about 80% of the book that way. So it is a book about a fictional speech to text startup based on a real speech to text startup that I wrote 80% of using speech to text. But it wasn't ever me sitting down for, okay, this half hour a day is for writing.
Yeah, fascinating. And I really love how to differentiate the book, you've written in a story format, and your objective is to get founder advice that most founders would want to read and make it more interesting. So how can people find more about you, follow you? And then also the question behind the book cover, how did you come up with that? And how can people find the book?
Sure. So first things first, right? I have a personal website. It's Andrew, the letter B as in boy, Ackerman. Benjamin's my middle name. So it's andrewbackerman.com. If you're like, hey, to hell with that, I don't care anything about this guy, but the book's kind of interesting, you can find it on Amazon. It's The Entrepreneur's Odyssey, a novel guide to startup success. Yes, I like puns. In fact, there's some visual puns in here. If you can see, like the guy over here, he's got a chainsaw. So he's his way through the startup maze. That was actually a founder I backed 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, with one of the best designers I knew. And I'm like, I'd introduced him to a lot of people. And I was like, hey, I can finally use you myself. So I like a lot of that. You're happy to, your readers are welcome to get the book. If you like it, my contact info is somewhere on my website. Tell me, post reviews. So that's all fine and dandy. The second half of your question was something about differentiating. Was it about the cover?
Yeah, the story behind the cover.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So part of it was, it's actually interesting. Again, with the whole theme of your typical business book lacks any kind of imagination. I went into a Barnes and Noble, I know, actual brick and mortar store. And I stood about 15 feet away from the business section. I kind of let my eyes unfocus a little bit. And I noticed like some commonalities. Like almost all the books were solid covers with either a picture of the author on the front or a kind of visual pun, a light bulb, but on top it became a dandelion. They're talking about networks, right? Yeah. Or like $100 bill on a fish hook. It's sales techniques with a hook. And they were all in kind of solid colors, pastels, primaries, and there weren't a lot of patterning to it. So I'm like, okay, we're going to do a maze. It's like a maze. It's an interesting pattern. I even went to the point where I'm looking at the spines, and I'm like, they're all solid spines with solid letters on it. So I carried the theme of the maze around. So even on its side, it will stand out. I even went to the sci-fi fantasy section just to see what can I do differently. And a lot of them actually have a picture or silhouette of the character on the spine. I said, that'd be awesome, but my book wasn't thick enough, so I couldn't do that. I really thought that through. And of course, the irony is it's not in brick and mortar stores, but it did actually, and this was partly by accident. Once I was talking with a designer and we came down with this theme, he was like, your Lism will cost you 10 times as much because I'm not allowed to use generative AI because your publisher isn't comfortable with the rights. But we could do this. And he showed me this kind of cartoony thing. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh, that looks a little bit like The Far Side with Greg Larson. That's awesome. People will see my book. They'll think it's in the wrong section. They'll pick it up to move it. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah. So there's actually a lot of thought that went behind the book. And thanks for asking, because that doesn't usually come up.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure the audience to check out Andrew's book. The links will be in the show notes. I'm sure and then be sure to read it and give Andrew a good review and follow him and connect with him. And if you have any questions, and thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
This was fun. You asked a lot of questions that don't normally come up. So thank you.
Yeah.